All right. Hello, my wicked darlings. How are you? Hope you are all well. This is Tad. I am here. It is 101. Got a little bit of a slow start because of some technical stuff here on this end. Not very interesting, so I won't bother to tell you about it. But enough said. I am going to be finishing up Wind in the Willows tonight. I have no idea how long it's going to take. I have a feeling it will be not very long. I was back looking at how much I had left, and it doesn't look like it's going to take up a huge portion of the time. So, one way or the other, I will finish it tonight and think of something else to do tomorrow. I will discuss that in a moment. I actually also have a few things I wanted to say about Wind in the Willows and the effect it had on me in terms of my writing and things like that. So, what else did I want to mention? Well, we had some sad news this week, as those who follow me on social media are aware. Some of you, many of you, may remember Lily, who is our downstairs cat for the first several years of me doing these readings, which is freaky to think about now that it's been going on that long. But I think I started in 2019. Good Lord. Something close to that anyway. It was certainly during COVID, because that was the impetus of starting this in the first place. Anyway, so those of you who were back with me in those days will remember Lily, the office cat. She died. I don't want to say passed away. I've never been a big fan of that particular euphemism. She, like another orange cat very dear to me, my dear cat Fever, who was one of the first two cats I ever lived with, who had lymphoma and was at the end of his tether and was about to be taken in to be euthanized and decided to die at home. And in the same way, Lily, who has been not too well for a long time, and in fact, she was probably considerably older than we thought she was. We got her from somebody who couldn't take care of her, but we did it through a third party, so we never had the full take on how old she was. We were just guessing, and the last couple of years she was really getting very fragile. So when she went to the vet with her current caretaker, who's one of our young people, the vet told him she's probably at least 14 or 15, and we had thought she was more like 10 or 11. So anyway, but very sad, and we are. This is what happens. This is what happens with animals. We all hope that that our kids outlive us, but we all pretty much know that most of our animals are not going to outlive us. So it happens, and it's painful. Anyway, so I just wanted to mention it because I know some of you had seen it, and you don't have to, she hasn't been living directly with me for a year. So although I have gotten to see her a few times, but animals are family, at least for people like us who are animal people. And so it's always painful. But she had a good, long life, and I think we gave her a lot of love and concern. And I know that that our young person who has been taking care of her did a really good job with her and was extremely kind and loving and what's the word I'm looking for? Not comprehensive, but anyway, paid very good attention to what was going on with her and had her checked up regularly. And the last half a year or so was having to give her fluid shots and all kinds of things. So definitely was a great cat parent. Anyway, so what else did I want to talk about? I'm in the process of working on this Splintered Sun, and I'm beginning to feel it now, in the sense I'm about 5 chapters in, and it's beginning to make sense to me kind of in how it's going to work, I think. What I'm desperately trying to do at this point, because I'm intending these to be single volume stories, I hope to do several of them, but they're supposed to each wrap up in one thing. So as I'm adding characters, there's a part of me that's going, this is how trilogies happen, and this is how trilogies turn into tetralogies. So I'm being very cautious with that. But it is beginning to feel more like I'm getting the grip for how I'm going to tell the story. The characters are beginning to make sense to me. As I said, I had a lot of stuff plotted, but that's very different from actually creating characters on the page. You can think in your head, okay, this character is going to do this, then this character is going to do that. But unless you can make it so that these things come organically out of the characters and their interactions with the events, it doesn't matter how clever your plot twists are or whatever they might be. It just doesn't matter because the readers are not going to be invested. Because they won't care about the characters, or they won't believe what you want the characters to do, or, all kinds of problems. So that's the main thing that I'm working on in the moment in terms of creative work. Although I'm doing a few other things too. I still have some more pages to sign for the tip-in for the British special edition of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I will be obviously signing books, in another month and a half or so when Navigator's Children is ready to come out. So anybody who wants to get books signed, I'm sure there'll be a way to manage that. I know that Sean Speakman is going to be doing, having a whole bunch of books signed, and there also, of course, is the special edition that Sean and Grahame Books is coming out with as well. Not just the English, the UK special edition, but there's an American special edition, which some of you have already bought the first book or two, I think. Anyway, so what else? Just, another kind of overwhelming week of stuff to deal with, but nothing bad. Everybody else is okay. Johnny the big dog has never shown any other negative signs after that one scary day we had where he clearly had eaten something he shouldn't. Little Walter is tottery, but he's hanging in. He's like, he's a four-legged barnacle, basically. He just always wants you to settle in somewhere so he can huddle up against you and get warm. It's charming, and, it's also, part of a dog getting old, and especially a dog who never had much fat on him anyway. He looks like Bambi. He always has. Walter has very long legs. He's very thin. He kind of looks like a mini pincher, but he is, as far as we know, he is a Chihuahua. He's definitely a deer-headed Chihuahua, as they say, not an apple-headed Chihuahua. More about Chihuahuas than you needed to know, I'm sure. Let me think. Anything else? I can't think of anything offhand. Let me go see if I can see if there's anybody waiting to be said hello to. I see my dear friend Olaf. Hello, Olaf. I see Penny. Hi, Penny. Rosalba. A pleasure to have you. Chris. Hello, Chris. Good to see you, too. That is Christian Fabricius, who is the person who kindly puts these up on YouTube. And I have to make more of an announcement about that, because there's like 300 and something of these things now, going on 400. So anyway, I need to make more of a deal about that, because Chris has done a lot of work over the years. Who else is here? Nikki. Hello, Nikki. Good to see you. That's Nikki Chetwin. Isaac is here. Hello, Isaac. Ivan, my buddy. Good to see you. And Ilva, my darling. Good to see you, too. Nicole. Hello, Nicole. Dirk. Hello, Dirk. Checking in from Berlin. Who else is here? Wouter. Good to see you, Wouter. Carol. Hello, Carol. And thank you, Wouter. That's kind. Who else? Everybody. Petra. Hello, Petra. And Kristen. Hello. You've been forgetting to watch. How could you forget? I mean, I'm just so God blessedly vibrant and exciting. Just kidding. I would forget to watch me too. Christina, hello. Good to see you. Thank you for the kind words about Lily. Yeah, okay, good. Ilva seconds my thing about despising the passed away euphemism. I've been going through this, of course, ever since my mom died in 2022, which seems longer ago in kind of general terms than it does to me as a person involved. I just, yeah, I don't like saying they passed away, they're gone. I mean, it does feel like a euphemism, and it's not necessary. It's not necessary. My parents, my friends, my animals, everybody in my life who has died, that's what happened. It wasn't almost in any of these cases. It wasn't just a gentle passing where nobody noticed until it was over. I mean, it's a fact of life. It's a fact of mortality. And we have to deal with these things. And one of the ways to deal with it is to call it what it is, I think. But that's just me. I'm not trying to legislate for anybody else. Who else is here? James. Hello, James. Good to see you. And Maria. Hello, hello. And Sandra. So good to see you all. I'm glad I've had a chance at least to check in with most of you. Penny, did I say hello to you, Penny? Okay, good. I thought so. Anyway, anything else I need to look in on right now? No, looks like everything is clear. So, okay, anything else that I wanted to mention? No, not off the top of my head. Deb makes noises every now and then about maybe doing another merch thing. We've talked to Chris Fab about that, so Chris knows that has at least been in our minds, and it will be considered. Will continue to be considered. Things will have to calm down a little bit. Deb and I are going on a trip the halfway through the first week of October, so I think we leave town on the 3rd of October, and we'll be gone for about a week. So that will wrap through at least one weekend where I won't be here to read. But other than that, I don't know if you can see over my shoulder here. I can't, it's weird having this thing mirrored because I don't know where to point. But back there, you can see it. A cat. That is PJ, of course. PJ is a cat with a very impressive embonpoint, as they used to say in the 19th century, of male gentlemen with a certain large belly and chest, embonpoint. In part probably because I keep putting treats and PJs in the treat box back there, which you can see him monkeying around with. That's probably contributing to his very pleasing teddy bear physiognomy. Anyway, so anything else? No. As I mentioned, I'm going to finish Wind in the Willows. Before I start the last bit here, I'm going to mention, actually, there's one thing. I might, if I can find a copy for tomorrow night, I might actually, another book that's been super important to me that I haven't talked about that much is The Once and Future King by T.H. White, which is another brilliant book, although several of his are worthy of sharing. But that one is one of the ones that had a big effect on me. That and Mervyn Peake's Gormenghast books and several others informed my early writing, certainly, as well as many of the other people that I told you about, the Roger Zelazny's and Michael Moorcock's and Fritz Leibers of the world. Or I could read a Fritz Leiber story, because he wrote some really wonderful fantasy stories. Anyway, but one of the things that made me think of T.H. White tonight is I was thinking about how profound in The Wind in the Willows, and in other things as well, but The Wind in the Willows, a lot of T.H. White stuff, is this kind of concept of English pastoralism, for lack of a better word. This love of country and countryside, this love of the natural world, but of a particularly English sort. Pastoralism in, places where they have big mountains like the Alps, or even smaller mountains like in Scotland, is very different than the pastoralism of England, which is largely flat, green, treed, with lots of trees, and hills, downs, and things like that, but not really mountains. So it's a largely, excuse the expression, two-dimensional physical environment, which is very amenable to being crossed on foot. And you see it in Tolkien, the attention to detail. You see it in T.H. White certainly was, and I'll talk more about him if I read some stuff from him, but T.H. White, lots of others, very enthralled by the spirit of primarily the British countryside. And obviously The Wind in the Willows is very much about that. It's about kind of a reintroduction of humanity to the world. But in this case, obviously, there are a lot of people that are kind of alluded to at the time when Kenneth Grahame was writing this book. There were a lot of people who were living very close to the land, but people like Kenneth Grahame, I suspect, and a lot of others for whom he was writing were not, or had not in the same way. They were not forced to draw a living from the land in the way a lot of other people do. So the pastoralism was a form of romanticism. Nothing wrong with that. I am not a critic of romanticism or of romanticizing things. And I think that for humans, especially humans in our state of the world, in our advanced stage of civilization, well, advanced compared to what? But in our complicated stage of civilization, there's nothing wrong with romanticizing the natural world, because we tend to underestimate the natural world. And as we're seeing with climate change and things like that, natural world doesn't really give a damn about us. We are capable of affecting the natural world, but the natural world is not saying, oh, but I better not do anything that'll screw things up for humans. The natural world just keeps adjusting. And if the temperatures go up, then life evolves and life changes, and we're going to be dealing with all the problems that human beings have because we build on seacoasts and we build on rivers. That's how our civilization was put together, even though it's not quite as critical as it used to be 100 years ago. But it is now, and it still is that way now. We still have all of our major cities almost on ports, river ports, seaports, etc. So climate change is going to affect a lot of things, and I don't think it hurts at all for people to be thinking a little bit more about the natural world. And I don't even think it hurts for people to romanticize the natural world in the sense of looking at it as the great provider of answers. Or for some people, it's kind of a stand-in for God in an era where for many people it's harder to believe in an old-fashioned conception of God. But people can understand nature, and they can see it, and they can look out at the stars and look at the natural world and look at a forest or look at a waterfall and say, this is something outside of my personal understanding, in the sense of I'm not part of it. I am observing it and observing how it goes on even without me. And the two of the best lines that ever came out of the Beatles, one, of course, and I think Ilva and I both agree that we want this on our tombstone. One of them is we're not having the same tombstone. I mean, our individual tombstones. I'm not that cheap. I'm not going to have myself buried next to Ilva so I can crib off of her tombstone. But we both, Ilva and I, because we talked about this when I was in Germany, I think if I remember correctly, we both agree that we would like to have the line, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make, from Abbey Road, from the last part of Abbey Road, as the line on our tombstone. And I think that's absolutely it for me, and it kind of sums everything up. But another line that I've always loved, and which I think is equally profound, and is germane to this little conversation here, this little monologue here, is from Within You, Without You by George Harrison. And the line there is, life goes on within you and without you. And of course, there's, it has more than one meaning. There's the life goes on within you and outside of you, without, because that's the original meaning of without, or one original meaning of without. But it also means life is going to go on whether you're here or not. And that means, in my case, me, whether I'm here or not. My beloved parents who died, in the last couple of years. It's shocking to me that life continues to go on without those two super important people in my life. But that is the way it works. And so I think all of these things are something that it got me when I was a kid. It got me with The Lord of the Rings. It got me with The Wind in the Willows. All of these, this idea of there is something beyond us that can be grasped from nature. And if you want to consider it as a religious thing, you can. That's fine. I didn't. But I think that it's unarguable that there is something that comes to us from being in nature, around nature, and interacting with nature that we don't get otherwise. Anyway, in that spirit, I'm going to read I think it's the last chapter of The Wind in the Willows. And I will start here with this picture. And the chapter 12 is entitled The Return of Ulysses. And there, let me move that a little closer. There you see all of the animals, the mole, the badger, the rat, and of course Mr. Toad getting ready to go back and reclaim Toad Hall. So, somewhat late, but still, I'm going to get started. Chapter 12, The Return of Ulysses. When it began to grow dark, the rat, with an air of excitement and mystery, summoned them back into the parlor, stood each of them up alongside of his little heap, and proceeded to dress them up for the coming expedition. He was very earnest and thoroughgoing about it, and the affair took quite a long time. First there was a belt to go round each animal, and then a sword to be stuck into each belt, and then a cutlass on the other side to balance it, which is of course another kind of sword. Then a pair of pistols, a policeman's truncheon, several sets of handcuffs, some bandages and sticking plaster, and a flask and a sandwich case. One wonders what kind of a prepper, what kind of a doomsday prepper is Ratty. The badger laughed good-humoredly and said, "All right, Ratty. It amuses you and it doesn't hurt me. I'm going to do all I've got to do with this here stick." But the rat only said, "Please, Badger, you know I shouldn't like you to blame me afterwards and say I had forgotten anything." When all was quite ready, the badger took a dark lantern in one paw, grasped his great stick with the other, and said, "Now then, follow me. Mole first, 'cause I'm very pleased with him. Rat next, Toad last. And look here, Toady, don't you chatter so much as usual or you'll be sent back, as sure as fate." The Toad was so anxious not to be left out that he took up the inferior position assigned to him without a murmur, and the animals set off. The badger led them along by the river for a little way, and then suddenly swung himself over the edge into a hole in the river bank, a little above the water. The mole and the rat followed silently, swinging themselves successfully into the hole as they had seen the badger do. But when it came to Toad's turn, of course, he managed to slip and fall into the water with a loud splash and a squeal of alarm. He was hauled out by his friends, rubbed down and wrung out hastily, comforted and set on his legs. But the badger was seriously angry and told him that the very next time he made a fool of himself, he would most certainly be left behind. So at last they were in the secret passage, and the cutting-out expedition had really begun. It was cold and dark and damp and low and narrow, and poor Toad began to shiver, partly from dread of what might be before him, partly because he was wet through. The lantern was far ahead, and he could not help lagging behind a little in the darkness. Then he heard the rat call out warningly, "Come on, Toad!" And a terror seized him of being left behind, alone in the darkness, and he came on with such a rush that he upset the rat into the mole and the mole into the badger, and for a moment all was confusion. The badger thought they were being attacked from behind, and as there was no room to use a stick or a cutlass, drew a pistol and was on the point of putting a bullet into Toad. When he found out what had really happened, he was very angry indeed and said, "Now, this time that tiresome Toad shall be left behind." But Toad whimpered, and the other two promised that they would be answerable for his good conduct, and at last the badger was pacified, and the procession moved on. Only this time the rat brought up the rear, with a firm grip on the shoulder of Toad. So they groped and shuffled along, with their ears pricked up and their paws on their pistols, till at last the badger said,
We ought by now to be pretty nearly under the hall.
Then suddenly they heard, far away as it might be, and yet apparently nearly over their heads, a confused murmur of sound, as if people were shouting and cheering and stamping on the floor and hammering on the tables. The toad's nervous terrors all returned, but the badger only remarked placidly,
"They are going it, the weasels."
The passage now began to slope upwards. They groped onward a little further, and then the noise broke out again, quite distinct this time, and very close above them. "Hooray, hooray, hooray, hooray!" they heard, and the stamping of little feet on the floor and the clinking of glasses as little fists pounded on the table.
"What a time they're having," said the badger. "Come on."
They hurried along the passage till it came to a full stop, and they found themselves standing under the trap door that led up into the butler's pantry. Such a tremendous noise was going on in the banqueting hall that there was little danger of their being overheard. The badger said,
"Now, boys, all together."
And the four of them put their shoulders to the trap door and heaved it back. Hoisting each other up, they found themselves standing in the pantry, with only a door between them and the banqueting hall, where their unconscious enemies were carousing. Unconscious in this case meaning unaware, not literally insensible and comatose. The noise, as they emerged from the passage, was simply deafening. At last, as the cheering and hammering slowly subsided, a voice could be made out saying, "Well, I do not propose to detain you much longer." Great applause. "But before I resume my seat," renewed cheering, "I should like to say one word about our kind host, Mr. Toad. We all know Toad." Great laughter. "Good Toad, modest Toad, honest Toad." Shrieks of merriment. "Only just let me get at him," muttered Toad, grinding his teeth.
"Hold hard a moment," cried the badger, restraining him with difficulty. "Get ready, all of you."
"Let me sing you a little song," went on the voice, "which I have composed on the subject of Toad." Prolonged applause. Then the chief weasel, for it was he, began in a high squeaky voice. "Toad, he went a-pleasuring gaily down the street." The badger drew himself up, took a firm grip of his stick with both paws, glanced round at his comrades, and cried,
"The hour is come. Follow me,"
and flung the door open wide. My, what a squealing and a squeaking and a screeching filled the air. Well might the terrified weasels dive under the tables and spring madly up at the windows. Well might the ferrets rush wildly for the fireplace and get hopelessly jammed in the chimney. Well might tables and chairs be upset, and glass and china be sent crashing on the floor in the panic of that terrible moment when the four heroes strode wrathfully into the room. The mighty badger, his whiskers bristling, his great cudgel whistling through the air, Mole, black and grim, brandishing his stick and shouting his awful war cry, "A mole! A mole!" Rat, desperate and determined, his belt bulging with weapons of every age and every variety. Toad, frenzied with excitement and injured pride, swollen to twice his ordinary size, leaping into the air and emitting toad whoops that chilled them to the marrow. "Toad, he went a-pleasuring!" he yelled. "I'll pleasure him!" And he went straight for the chief weasel. They were but four in all, but to the panic-stricken weasels, the hall seemed full of monstrous animals, gray, black, brown, and yellow, whooping and flourishing enormous cudgels, and they broke and fled with squeals of terror and dismay, this way and that, through the windows, up the chimney, anywhere to get out of reach
of those terrible sticks. And there we see Badger and Mole and Ratty and Toad crashing in on the weasels, and the weasels in full panicked retreat. The affair was soon over. Up and down the whole length of the hall strode the four friends, whacking with their sticks at every head that showed itself, and in 5 minutes the room was cleared. Through the broken windows the shrieks of terrified weasels escaping across the lawn were borne faintly to their ears. On the floor lay prostrate some dozen or so of the enemy, on whom the Mole was busily engaged in fitting handcuffs. The Badger, resting from his labors, leant on his stick and wiped his honest brow. "Mole," he said, "you're the best of fellows. Just cut along outside and look after those stoat sentry of yours and see what they're doing. I've an idea that, thanks to you, we shan't have much trouble from them tonight." The Mole vanished promptly through a window, and the Badger bade the other two set a table on its legs again, pick up knives and forks and plates and glasses from the debris on the floor, and see if they could find materials for a supper. "I want some grub, I do," he said in that rather common way he had of speaking. "Stir your stumps, Toad, and look lively. We've got your house back for you, and you don't offer us so much as a sandwich." Toad felt rather hurt that the Badger didn't say pleasant things to him as he had to the Mole, and tell him what a fine fellow he was and how splendidly he had fought, for he was rather particularly pleased with himself and the way he had gone for the chief weasel and sent him flying across the table with one blow of his stick. But he bustled about, and so did the rat, and soon they found some guava jelly in a glass dish, and a cold chicken, a tongue that had hardly been touched, some trifle, and quite a lot of lobster salad, and in the pantry they came upon a basket full of French rolls and any quantity of cheese, butter, and celery. They were just about to sit down when the Mole clambered in through the window, chuckling, with an armful of rifles. "It's all over," he reported, "from what I can make out, as soon as the stoats, who were very nervous and jumpy already, heard the shrieks and the yells and the uproar inside the hall. Some of them threw down their rifles." Excuse me. "Some of them threw down their rifles and fled. The others stood fast for a bit, but when the weasels came rushing out upon them, they thought they were betrayed, and the stoats grappled with the weasels, and the weasels fought to get away, and they wrestled and wriggled and punched each other and rolled over and over till most of them rolled into the river. They're all disappeared now, one way or the other, and I've got their rifles. So that's all right." "Excellent and deserving animal," said the Badger, his mouth full of chicken and trifle. "Now there's just one more thing I want you to do, Mole, before you sit down to your supper along with us, and I wouldn't trouble you, only I know I can trust you to see a thing done, and I wish I could say the same of everyone I know. I'd send the rat if he wasn't a poet. I want you to take those fellows on the floor there upstairs with you and have some bedrooms cleaned out and tidied up and made really comfortable. See that they sweep under the beds and put clean sheets and pillowcases on and turn down one corner of the bedclothes, just as you know it ought to be done. Oh, and have a can of hot water and clean towels and fresh cakes of soap put in each room. And then you can give them a licking apiece, if it's any satisfaction to you, and put them out by the back door. And we shan't see any more of them, I fancy. And then come along and have some of this cold tongue. It's first rate. I'm very pleased with you, Mole." The good-natured Mole picked up a stick, formed his prisoners up in a line on the floor, gave them the order, "Quick march," and led his squad off to the upper floor. After a time he appeared again, smiling, and said that every room was ready and as clean as a new pin. "And I didn't have to lick them either," he added. "I thought on the whole they had had licking enough for one night. And the weasels, when I put the point to them, quite agreed with me and said they wouldn't think of troubling me. They were very penitent and said they are extremely sorry for what they had done, but it was all the fault of the chief weasel and the stoats, and if ever they could do anything for us at any time to make up, we had only got to mention it. So I gave them a roll apiece and let them out the back, and off they ran as hard as they could. Then the mole pulled his chair up to the table and pitched into the cold tongue. And Toad, like the gentleman he was, put all his jealousy from him and said heartily, "Thank you kindly, dear Mole, for all your pains and trouble tonight, and especially for your cleverness this morning."
The Badger was pleased at that and said, "There spoke my brave Toad." So they finished their supper in great joy and contentment, and presently retired to rest between clean sheets, safe in Toad's ancestral home, won back by matchless valor, consummate strategy, and a proper handling of sticks. The following morning, Toad, who had overslept himself as usual, came down to breakfast disgracefully late, and found on the table a certain quantity of eggshells, some fragments of cold and leathery toast, a coffee pot 3/4 empty, and really very little else, which did not tend to improve his temper, considering that, after all, it was his own house. Through the French windows of the breakfast room, he could see the mole and the water rat sitting in wicker chairs out on the lawn, evidently telling each other stories, roaring with laughter and kicking their short legs up in the air. The Badger, who was in an armchair and deep in the morning paper, merely looked up and nodded when Toad entered the room. But Toad knew his man, so he sat down and made the best breakfast he could, merely observing to himself that he would get square with the others sooner or later. When he had nearly finished, the Badger looked up and remarked rather shortly, "I'm sorry, Toad, but I'm afraid there's a heavy morning's work in front of you. You see, we really ought to have a banquet at once to celebrate this affair. It's expected of you. In fact, it's the rule."
"Oh, all right," said the Toad readily. "Anything to oblige. Though why on earth you should want to have a banquet in the morning I cannot understand. But you know I do not live to please myself, but merely to find out what my friends want, and then try and arrange it for 'em. You dear old Badger."
"Don't pretend to be stupider than you really are," replied the Badger crossly, "and don't chuckle and splutter in your coffee while you're talking. It's not manners. What I mean is, the banquet will be at night, of course, but the invitations will have to be written and got off at once, and you've got to write 'em. Now, sit down at that table. There's stacks of letter paper on it, with Toad Hall at the top in blue and gold, and write invitations to all our friends. And if you stick to it, we shall get them out before luncheon. And I'll bear a hand, too, and take my share of the burden. I'll order the banquet."
"What?" cried Toad, dismayed. "Me stop indoors and write a lot of rotten letters on a jolly morning like this, when I want to go round my property and set everything and everybody to rights and swagger about and enjoy myself? Certainly not. I'll see you. Stop a minute, though. Why, of course, dear Badger, what is my pleasure or convenience compared with that of others? You wish it done, and it shall be done. Go, Badger, order the banquet, order what you like, then join our young friends outside in their innocent mirth, oblivious excuse me, cat hair, oblivious of me and my cares and toils. I sacrifice this fair morning on the altar of duty and friendship."
Oh, give me just a second here. As you can see, the cat hair has gotten to me. turn this. Hang on, I'm not going anywhere. Okay, better. Just turned up the air thing.
I sacrifice this fair morning on the altar of duty and friendship.
The badger looked at him very suspiciously, but Toad's frank, open countenance made it difficult to suggest any unworthy motive in this change of attitude. He quitted the room, accordingly, in the direction of the kitchen, and as soon as the door had closed behind him, Toad hurried to the writing table. He would write the invitations, and he would take care to mention the leading part he had taken in the fight, and how he had laid the chief weasel flat, and he would hint at his adventures, and what a career of triumph he had to tell about, and on the fly-leaf he would give a sort of program of entertainment for the evening. Something like this, as he sketched it out in his head.
Speech by Toad. There will be other speeches by Toad during the evening. Address by Toad. Synopsis. Our prison system. The waterways of Old England. Horse dealing and how to deal. Property, its rights and its duties. Back to the land. A typical English squire. Song by Toad, composed by himself. Other compositions by Toad will be sung in the course of the evening by the composer.
The idea pleased him mightily, and he worked very hard and got all the letters finished by noon, at which hour it was reported to him that there was a small and rather bedraggled weasel at the door, inquiring timidly whether he could be of any service to the gentleman. Toad swaggered out and found it was one of the prisoners of the previous evening, very respectful and anxious to please. He patted him on the head, shoved the bundle of invitations into his paw, and told him to cut along quick and deliver them as fast as he could, and if he liked to come back again in the evening, perhaps there might be a shilling for him. Or again, perhaps there mightn't, and the poor weasel seemed really quite grateful, and hurried off eagerly to do his mission. When the other animals came back to luncheon, very boisterous and breezy after a morning on the river, the mole, whose conscience had been pricking him, looked doubtfully at Toad, expecting to find him sulky or depressed. Instead, he was so uppish and inflated that the mole began to suspect something, while the rat and the badger exchanged significant glances. As soon as the meal was over, Toad thrust his paws deep into his trouser pockets, remarked casually, "Well, look after yourselves, you fellows. Ask for anything you want," and was swaggering off in the direction of the garden, where he wanted to think out an idea or two for his coming speeches, when the rat caught him by the arm. Toad rather suspected what he was after, and did his best to get away, but when the badger took him firmly by the other arm, he began to see that the game was up. The two animals conducted him between them into the small smoking room that opened out of the entrance hall, shut the door, and put him into a chair. Then they both stood in front of him, while Toad sat silent and regarded them with much suspicion and ill humor. "Now look here, Rat. Now look here, Toad," said the rat. "It's about this banquet. I'm very sorry I am to have to speak to you like this, but we want you to understand clearly, once and for all, that there are going to be no speeches and no songs. Try and grasp the fact that on this occasion we're not arguing with you. We're just telling you." Toad saw that he was trapped. They understood him, they saw through him, they had got ahead of him. His pleasant dream was shattered. "Mayn't I sing just one little song?" he pleaded piteously. "No, not one little song," replied the rat firmly, though his heart bled as he noticed the trembling lip of the poor disappointed Toad. "It's no good, Toady. You know well that your songs are all conceit and boasting and vanity, and your speeches are all self-praise and
And well, gross exaggeration and gas, put in the Badger in his common way. And here they are, telling the Toad there will be no speechifying. "It's for your own good, Toady," went on the Rat. "You know you must turn over a new leaf sooner or later, and now seems a splendid time to begin. A sort of turning point in your career. Please don't think that saying all this doesn't hurt me more than it hurts you." Toad remained a long while plunged in thought. At last he raised his head, and the traces of strong emotion were visible on his features. "You have conquered, my friends," he said in broken accents. "It was, to be sure, but a small thing that I asked, merely leave to blossom and expand for yet one more evening, to let myself go and hear the tumultuous applause that always seems to somehow bring out my best qualities. However, you are right, I know, and I am wrong. Henceforth I will be a very different Toad. My friends, you shall never have occasion to blush for me again. But oh dear, this is a hard world." And pressing his handkerchief to his face, he left the room with faltering footsteps. "Badger," said the Rat, "I feel like a brute. I wonder what you feel like." "Oh, I know," said the Badger gloomily, "but the thing had to be done. This good fellow has got to live here and hold his own and be respected. Would you have him a common laughing-stock, mocked and jeered at by stoats and weasels?" "Of course not," said the Rat. "And talking of weasels, it's lucky we came upon that little weasel just as he was setting out with Toad's invitations. I suspected something from what you told me, and had a look at one or two. They were simply disgraceful. I confiscated the lot, and the good mole is now sitting in the blue boudoir, filling up plain, simple invitation cards." At last the hour for the banquet began to draw near, and Toad, who on leaving the others had retired to his bedroom, was still sitting there, melancholy and thoughtful. His brow resting on his paw, he pondered long and deeply. Gradually his countenance cleared, and he began to smile long, slow smiles. Then he took to giggling in a shy, self-conscious manner. At last he got up, locked the door, drew the curtains across the windows, collected all the chairs in the room and arranged them in a semicircle, and took up his position in front of them, swelling visibly. And here, one of my very favorite illustrations of all time. And there's Toad singing to his imaginary audience. And took up his position in front of them, swelling visibly. Then he bowed, coughed twice, and letting himself go with uplifted voice, he sang to the enraptured audience that his imagination so clearly saw, Toad's last little song. The Toad came home. There was panic in the parlor and howling in the hall. There was crying in the cowshed and shrieking in the stall when the Toad came home. When the Toad came home, there was smashing in of window and crashing in of door. There was chivying of weasels that fainted on the floor. When the Toad came home, bang go the drums, the trumpeters are tooting, and the soldiers are saluting, and the cannon they are shooting, and the motor cars are hooting, as the hero comes. Shout hooray! And let each one of the crowd try and shout it very loud, in honor of an animal of whom you're justly proud, for it's Toad's great day. He sang this very loud and with great unction and expression, and when he had done, he sang it all over again. Then he heaved a deep sigh, a long, long, long sigh. Then he dipped his hairbrush in the water jug, parted his hair in the middle, and plastered it down very straight and sleek on each side of his face, and, unlocking the door, went quietly down the stairs to greet his guests, who he knew must be assembling in the drawing-room. All the animals cheered when he entered and crowded round to congratulate him and say nice things about his courage and his cleverness and his fighting qualities. But Toad only smiled faintly and murmured, "Not at all," or sometimes for a change, "On the contrary." Otter, who was standing at the hearthrug describing to an admirable circle of friends exactly how he would have managed things had he been there, came forward with a shout, threw his arm round Toad's neck, and tried to take him round the room in a triumphal progress. But Toad, in a mild way, was rather snubby to him, remarking gently, as he disengaged himself, "Badgers was the mastermind. The mole and the water rat bore the brunt of the fighting. I merely served in the ranks and did little or nothing." The animals were evidently puzzled and taken aback by this unexpected attitude of his, and Toad felt, as he moved from one guest to the other, making his modest responses, that he was an object of absorbing interest to everyone. The Badger had ordered everything of the best, and the banquet was a great success. There was much talking and laughter and chaff among the animals, but through it all Toad, who of course was in the chair, looked down his nose and murmured pleasant nothings to the animals on either side of him. At intervals he stole a glance at the Badger and the Rat, and always when he looked they were staring at each other with their mouths open, and this gave him the greatest satisfaction. Some of the younger and livelier animals, as the evening wore on, got whispering to each other that things were not so amusing as they used to be in the old days, and there were some knockings on the table and cries of, "Toad! Speech! Speech from Toad! Song! Mr. Toad's song!" But Toad only shook his head gently, raised one paw in mild protest, and by pressing delicacies on his guests, by topical small talk, and by earnest inquiries after members of their families not yet old enough to appear at social functions, managed to convey to them that this dinner was being run on strictly conventional lines. He was indeed an altered Toad. After this climax, the four animals continued to lead their lives, so rudely broken in upon by civil war, in great joy and contentment, undisturbed by further risings or invasions. Toad, after due consultation with his friends, selected a handsome gold chain and locket set with pearls, which he dispatched to the jailer's daughter with a letter that even the Badger admitted to be modest, grateful, and appreciative. And the engine driver, in his turn, was properly thanked and compensated for all his pains and trouble. Under severe compulsion from the Badger, even the barge woman was, with some trouble, sought out, and the value of her horse discreetly made good to her, though Toad kicked terribly at this, holding himself to be an instrument of fate, sent to punish fat women with mottled arms, who couldn't tell a real gentleman when they saw one. The amount involved, it was true, was not very burdensome, the gypsy's valuation being admitted by local assessors to be approximately correct. Sometimes, in the course of long summer evenings, the friends would take a stroll together in the wild wood, now successfully tamed, so far as they were concerned, and it was pleasing to see how respectfully they were greeted by the inhabitants, and how the mother weasels would bring their young ones to the mouths of their holes and say, pointing, "Look, baby, there goes the great Mr. Toad, and that's the gallant water rat, a terrible fighter, walking along with him. And yonder comes the famous Mr. Mole, of whom you so often have heard your father tell." But when their infants were fractious and quite beyond their control, they would quiet them by telling how, if they didn't hush them and not fret them, the terrible gray Badger would up and get them. This was a base libel on Badger, who, though he cared little about society, was rather fond of children, but it never failed to have its full effect.
And that is the end of the story, with Mole and Rat getting ready for sleep. And that is the end of The Wind in the Willows. And thank you all very much for bearing with me. As I said many times, it has a deep emotional and family significance for me, but also I just think it's a lovely book. And, it's one of those things that when you hear it for the first time, especially when you are a young person like I was, it sticks with you and becomes part of who you are. As happens with many, many good things in life that we are introduced to when we are young. I don't know for sure what I'm going to do tomorrow. So you're going to have to those who are able to are just going to have to show up and find out. And those who are not able to do that will find out when it has been, what's the word I'm looking for? When it has been recorded and made available on YouTube. But I will probably either start a new book or I will read a short story of some kind. And that will be as usual at the same time, 7 p.m. I will be here the next week, as far as I know, because we aren't going out. And then the week after that, I will be gone. But everything else should be normal. So next week I should be here. But as I said, 7 p.m. later today, I will be here. I want to thank you all for joining me and for putting up with me. Is anybody here I haven't said hello to yet who needs a hello? Melissa, there's somebody I hadn't seen. And James Hooten. Hello, James. And Mark, who I hadn't seen before, although obviously I see Mark all the time on here. So thank you all very much. Great pleasure to spend time with you and to share something like that with you. And I will see you either next week, or those of you who are in this kind of general time zone can join me then tomorrow or today later, 7. I think I have babbled enough now. I think I am going to hang it up for the night. So again, great pleasure, and be here with me next time. And I will keep doing this for a while anyway. So with that, I say take good care of yourselves, take good care of your friends and loved ones, and anybody else you see around you that might need a helping hand or just a friendly face. And once again, I thank you so much for spending time with me, and I will see you real soon. Peace. Be well. See you later. Yes, I hear you, you noisy bugger. Yeah, it's your fault I've got cat dander up my nose, so be quiet.